The streets of Manhattan were gray that morning, as if the entire city was trapped under a dense layer of gloom. The cold autumn wind made people quicken their pace, huddled under their coats, while Martha Kane walked with measured steps toward the Parker Heights building. It was another workday, and as usual, she carried a heavy bag filled with cleaning supplies and a coat that wasn't enough to shield her from the biting cold. As she walked, she watched the lit-up shop windows and people coming in and out of cafes. These scenes, although common, always made her think about how life seemed different for others. For her, everything was about survival. Since her husband had left her, she had devoted herself entirely to caring for her sick mother and keeping the bills paid. Nothing was left. No energy, no money, no dreams. As she approached the building, something caught her eye. A man was sitting on the ground, hunched against the wall of the neighboring building. He wore a torn coat, his feet protected only by worn shoes that looked incapable of surviving another season. He was shivering, trying to hide his blue hands under the thin, dirty blanket covering him. Martha stopped instinctively. She felt a lump in her throat as she looked at him. The scene was harsh, but not uncommon in a city like New York. Still, something about this man made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the emptiness in his eyes, or maybe the fact that he seemed too young to have been so defeated by life. She took a step forward, but then stopped. It wasn't uncommon for homeless people to be ignored. She herself had learned to avert her eyes on many occasions, not out of a lack of empathy, but because she knew she couldn't help everyone. But at that moment, something inside her screamed to do something. She turned around and walked over to him. She knelt slowly, so as not to startle him. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but audible. The man slowly lifted his eyes, as if he didn't even have the strength to react. For a moment, Martha was at a loss for words. "Are you okay?" she asked, knowing the answer was obvious. He tried to smile, but all he managed was a slight movement of his cracked lips. I'm trying." The response hit her like a punch to the gut. That was all he had, an attempt to exist, a constant and silent struggle against the circumstances around him. "Are you cold?" she asked, even though she knew the question sounded almost cruel. He nodded slightly, but said nothing more. Martha looked around, as if hoping someone else might come to help him, but people continued to rush by, some pretending not to see them, others casting quick glances of disdain. She knew no one would stop. After hesitating for a second, she took out the blanket she carried in her bag. It was an old gift from her mother, and she always took it to work because she sometimes had a break after lunch. It was one of the few items she truly valued. It had been with her on many cold nights, in moments when she herself thought she wouldn't make it. "Here," she said, wrapping the man in the blanket. "This will help." The man widened his eyes. I can't take this." "Yes, you can. You need it more than I do." He held the blanket carefully, as if it were made of crystal. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, he asked, "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Martha replied simply. "And because someone should." The man tried to hold back his tears, but one escaped, sliding down his gaunt face. He murmured a barely audible "thank you," but Martha understood it perfectly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Charlie." "Well, Charlie, take care, okay?" He nodded, still unable to believe what had just happened. Martha stood up and headed back to the building, her heart feeling lighter but also worried. She couldn't stop thinking about how he would survive the next day. Later, as she passed through the hallway, she saw Walter Thompson, the building manager. He was standing near the counter, hands in his pockets, with an appraising look. He was a middle-aged man, thin, with perfectly combed hair and an expensive suit that seemed to scream authority. "Martha," he called. She stopped instantly, her blood running cold. "Yes, Mr. Thompson? I need a word with you. Now." His tone was not friendly. Martha knew this wasn't good. She followed him to the small basement office, trying to calm her breathing. When she entered, he closed the door with a click that seemed louder than it should. "Please sit down," he said, pointing to the wooden chair in front of his desk. Martha sat down, holding her bag in her lap as if it were a shield. "I received a notice from the head of security," he began, opening a folder on the desk. "Something was caught on the external cameras this morning." She didn't respond, but she felt her heart race. "You interacted with a homeless man at the building entrance. You gave him something. I confirmed it was a blanket." "It was mine," she quickly said. "It didn't belong to the building." "That doesn't matter," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You know very well that we have a policy against any interaction with these people. It affects the building's image." Martha was speechless. "But—" He was cold. "He could have. That's not your concern," Thompson cut her off. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "Martha, you've worked here for 5 years. You know how things work. We can't let something like this happen. Our tenants are important businesses, and they don't want to see homeless people camping at the door." "I wasn't trying to cause problems, Mr. Thompson. I was just trying to help. And by doing that, you broke the rules." He took a deep breath, as if regretting what was coming, but his tone remained cold. "I regret to inform you that we will have to terminate your contract. Your shift ends now." The words hit her like a blow. For a moment, she was speechless. "Please, Mr. Thompson, I need this job. I have my mother to care for." "That's not my concern, Martha. Collect your things." She sat there, unable to move. When she finally managed to speak, her voice came out broken. "That's it. After everything I've done for the building, you're firing me for an act of kindness." "Rules are rules," he said, emotionless. Martha left the office, her legs trembling. In the locker room, she started taking off her uniform with shaky hands, feeling the eyes of some of her colleagues on her. "Are you okay?" Liz, a colleague who had just walked in, asked. "They fired me," Martha said, unable to hold back her tears. "What for?" "Because of the blanket." "That's absurd." Liz looked at her, indignant, but then glanced around, fearing someone might be listening. "I'm so sorry, Martha." Martha left through the back door, tears freezing on her face. As she walked the streets, unsure of what she would do next, she thought of Charlie and the blanket. She didn't regret what she had done, but the question remained, what now? The days following Martha Kane's dismissal were a whirlwind of uncertainty and hardship. The small apartment in the Bronx where she lived with her mother, Betty, felt colder than ever, reflecting the void left by the loss of her only source of income. Martha sat at the kitchen table, a pile of bills in front of her. The yellow light from the lamp highlighted the exhaustion on her face. She tried to do the math, but the result was always the same. She didn't have enough to pay everything. "Sweetheart," Betty called, appearing in the kitchen doorway. Martha's mother was a strong woman, even with the signs of time and illness marking her body. "You've been up since early. You need to rest." "I'm fine, Mom," Martha replied with a weak smile. Betty leaned on her cane and pulled up a chair. "Do you think I don't notice? You barely ate yesterday, and now you're sitting there with those papers again." Martha tried to look away. "I'm just sorting things out. That's all." Her mother touched her hand. "You always find a way, Martha. Always. God knows you didn't deserve what happened at that building." The mention of Parker Heights brought a wave of bitterness. "They didn't even want to hear my side, Mom. It was like I was disposable." Because they're cruel. People who live in that world don't understand what real life is like. Martha forced a smile, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. She knew she needed to find a solution, but at that moment, she could see nothing but debts and hardships. They would deposit her severance pay, which wasn't much, and it would cover the bills for a while, but only the basics. Meanwhile, at Parker Heights, the impact of Martha's dismissal began to spread, though silently. Liz, the co-worker who had witnessed Martha's humiliation, couldn't forget what had happened. In the break room during lunch, Liz found some colleagues. They were quiet, looking at their phones or drinking coffee. "Has anyone seen the video of Martha?" Liz asked, lowering her voice. "What video?" Jim, one of the security guards, frowned. "That thing with her. It's on the security cameras," Liz replied. "She just gave a blanket to a guy on the street. And for that, she was fired. It's ridiculous." Jim scratched his head, uncomfortable. "Look, Liz, she broke the rules. Thompson always made it clear. Rules? Really? Rules are more important than a human life." Liz shot back, her voice full of indignation. "Did you see how she left here? After everything she did for this place?" Silence fell over the room. Some colleagues avoided eye contact, while others murmured among themselves. No one wanted to confront Liz, and the fear of Thompson still hung over everyone. Jim sighed. "Thompson isn't known for being flexible. Remember Kevin?" Liz frowned. "What happened to him?" Kevin complained in a staff meeting about unpaid overtime. The next week, he was demoted to basement cleaning. After that, he quit. "That's absurd," Liz responded, but her voice was now more subdued. The mention of Kevin was a reminder of Thompson's power. Later that same day, Liz made an impulsive decision. She entered the security room while Jim was out, searching for the file of Martha's video. It didn't take long to find the recording. She watched the video again, feeling a lump in her throat as she saw Martha's generosity being punished so cruelly. Without thinking twice, Liz transferred the video to her phone. That night, she sent it to a small group of colleagues with a short message. "This is what they did to Martha. Watch it." At first, the responses were hesitant. "This is horrible," wrote one of the cleaners. "I can't believe they fired her for this," another employee replied. However, most remained silent, fearing that any comment would be seen or tracked by Thompson. In the days that followed, the video began to circulate among almost all Parker Heights employees. During breaks, in hallways, and even in the service elevator, small conversations began to arise. "Did you see the video?" "Yes. It's outrageous. Keep your voice down. You want Thompson to hear." Fear was widespread, but there was also a spark of solidarity. Some employees started leaving small notes in the locker Martha had used as a form of silent protest, with messages of support like, "You're a good person and we miss you." Meanwhile, Liz watched everything from a distance, trying to gauge reactions. She knew she was risking a lot by spreading the video, but she couldn't stay quiet in the face of such injustice. Martha, at home, had no idea what was happening. Her days were filled with financial worries and the constant care of her mother. But something was beginning to change, silently, in the building she had left behind. The atmosphere at Parker Heights was strange. Something had changed. In the hallways, whispers that had once been suppressed now seemed constant. Cautious glances were exchanged among employees, while others quickly looked away, fearing being seen talking about things they shouldn't. People were tense, walking as if they were stepping on broken glass. Walter Thompson, the building manager, was no fool. He sensed the unrest, even if no one had the courage to express it directly. When he crossed the lobby, the forced smiles of the employees suddenly seemed more strained. Conversations would stop the instant he passed. At first, he ignored it. He believed it was just meaningless gossip. But as the days passed, it began to deeply annoy him. He could feel the discomfort, the silent rebellion, and it ate at him. He was the kind of man who needed absolute control, and anything that threatened his authority kept him up at night. "Jim," he called, stopping by the security room during one of his rounds. The guard, who was reviewing the day's surveillance footage, looked up. "Yes, Mr. Thompson? What's going on here?" Thompson asked, his tone a mix of suspicion and anger. "What do you mean?" "The employees. There are whispers in the hallways, looks. Something's different." He leaned in, his face coming inches from Jim's. "I don't like changes, Jim. I want to know what's happening." Jim hesitated. He knew exactly what Thompson wanted to hear, but he also knew that if he said the wrong thing, he could be next on the firing list. "I haven't heard anything, sir. At least nothing concrete." Thompson narrowed his eyes. "If you find out anything, come directly to me. Understood?" "Yes, sir." He left the security room with heavy steps. Something was out of control, and he didn't know what. This thought consumed him, to the point where he found himself biting his nails, a habit he had abandoned years ago. Meanwhile, in the background, Martha's video continued to circulate. Each new person who watched it felt something that was hard to describe: indignation, sadness, shame. The collective silence was almost an indictment of Thompson, even if no one dared to say it out loud. Liz, the one responsible for spreading the video, felt a mix of fear and satisfaction. During her breaks, she kept an eye on Thompson, trying to decipher if he already knew. The man seemed more irritable than ever, but she couldn't tell if it was because of the video or something else. "Liz," a colleague whispered in the locker room, checking to see if they were alone. "Yes. Do you think he already knows about the video?" Liz shook her head. "I don't know. But if he does, he'll lose it. And if he finds out it was you, then I'll probably be the next to be fired. But someone had to do something." Meanwhile, on a floor that few employees even knew existed, William Grant was sitting in his spacious conference room, staring at a screen. The video of Martha was paused at the exact moment she wrapped Charlie in the blanket. He was paralyzed. That scene captivated him. There was something about the simplicity of the gesture, the look of surprise on the man's face, and the kindness in Martha's eyes that seemed to pierce through his emotional armor. Besides, he knew that man. He had received the video on his phone from an unknown number, but he knew that homeless man. He pressed the call button on his phone. "Bring me the reports on Parker Heights. All incidents recorded in the last 6 months. And summon 2 or 3 employees for a meeting, but don't mention my name." William was a man of few gestures and even fewer words. His interest in the building was strictly financial. His building wasn't in the charity business. But something about this case intrigued him. At the building, the tension continued to grow. Thompson began holding impromptu meetings with small groups of employees, trying to extract information. He asked vague questions, looked at the faces with suspicion. "Is everything going well?" he asked, in an almost casual tone, while his eyes assessed each reaction. "Yes, sir," was always the answer, but he knew it was a lie. Meanwhile, Martha continued her daily struggle in the Bronx. Between caring for her mother and trying to find another job, she had no energy to think about what she had left behind. The bills kept piling up, and each trip to the grocery store was a battle to make the money last longer. One night, while they were having thin soup for dinner, Betty looked at her daughter with concern. "You're so quiet, Martha." "I'm just tired, Mom. You should rest. Tomorrow's another day." But Martha knew that tomorrow would be just more of the same, a struggle to survive, with no end in sight. Back at Parker Heights, Liz received a message on her phone. It was an unexpected invitation for a meeting. There weren't many details, just a time and a place in the building. She looked at the message, her heart racing. She didn't know what was coming. She would probably be fired too. The atmosphere at Parker Heights was tenser than ever. Thompson, realizing that something was out of control, called an emergency meeting with the staff. His tone was acidic and direct, a combination of wounded authority and desperation. He crossed the small break room where the staff was gathered, his boots echoing on the floor as if to intimidate. "Let's make one thing clear," he began, crossing his arms and looking at each person in the room. "I know there are rumors going around. I know you're talking behind my back. And I'll be clear. I won't tolerate this." Liz swallowed hard, feeling his gaze briefly pass over her. Someone is spreading information and videos that shouldn't have even left this place. Thompson continued, his voice rising. "Whoever it is, know that I will find out. And when that happens, you won't just be fired. I will make sure you never find another job in this city." Some employees exchanged nervous glances, while others looked at the floor, avoiding eye contact. Liz tried to maintain a neutral expression, but the tension in her body was palpable. She knew Thompson suspected her, but she also knew that admitting anything would only make things worse. "Now get back to work," Thompson finished before slamming the door as he left. Meanwhile, in William Grant's office, the building owner continued his silent investigation. He had requested detailed reports on the building's administrative history and was already beginning to find inconsistencies. Thompson seemed more concerned with maintaining absolute control than ensuring the building's proper functioning. However, something bigger was underway. While William analyzed the data, an unexpected encounter had already happened days earlier. Charlie, the man Martha had helped weeks earlier, looked different. He had managed to get new clothes at a shelter, and his face was now clean-shaven. Still, his eyes bore the weight of years of suffering. He had returned to Parker Heights several times, hoping to find Martha again, but she never showed up. After a few days of frustrated attempts, he saw Liz at the building entrance and decided to take a chance. He approached carefully, afraid of being chased away as had happened so many times before. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Liz, who was reviewing something on her phone, looked up, surprised to see him. "Can I help you?" she asked, suspicious. "Do you know the woman who used to work here?" "Martha?" Liz frowned, looking at him more closely. "Yes, I know her. Why?" Charlie hesitated for a moment. "I wanted to thank her. She helped me at a difficult time. I never saw her again." Liz sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "She was fired because of what she did for you." Charlie's eyes widened. "Fired because of the blanket?" "Yes," Liz replied. "And there's more. The video of her helping you has been circulating here. That's why she lost her job. The manager here, Thompson, didn't want anything affecting the building's image." Anger and guilt mixed on Charlie's face. He took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. "I need to see that video." Liz hesitated. "Why?" "Please," he pleaded. "I know William Grant. I worked on events with him years ago. If I can show him that this woman doesn't deserve this, maybe he'll do something." Liz was silent for a moment. William's name carried too much weight to ignore. Finally, she agreed. "I'll show you, but this stays between us." Charlie watched the video on Liz's phone, and his expression changed. He looked both moved and determined. "I'll send this to William," he said, more to himself than to Liz. "If anyone can do something, it's him." "Do you really know William?" Liz asked, still cautious. "I did. A long time ago," Charlie replied. "Before everything fell apart." Liz didn't ask any more questions, but Charlie seemed lost in thought. He remembered how his life had changed so suddenly. He had been a promising executive, but in the middle of a corporate crisis, he ended up being scapegoated in a fraud scandal. Even though he wasn't directly at fault, his reputation was destroyed, and he fell into disgrace. Without a job, without friends, and consumed by pride, he ended up on the streets. Even now, he avoided seeking help directly. He didn't want to face the gaze of former colleagues or explain his situation. But something about Martha made him want to act, even if it was just to give her a chance he never had. Charlie took Liz's phone and sent the video, keeping the number private. He sent the video to William anonymously, with the message, "See what's happening in your building. There might still be time to fix this." And that's how the video reached William. At Parker Heights, Thompson felt the walls closing in. William's discreet meetings and the tense atmosphere among the employees left him on the brink of a collapse. Paranoia was taking over. He needed to act quickly to protect his position and hide his corrupt practices before it was too late. For months, he and the purchasing manager, Alan Myers, had been orchestrating a simple yet profitable scheme, buying overpriced cleaning supplies from unauthorized suppliers and pocketing the difference. The operation had been masked by reports designed to appear legitimate, but Thompson knew that if William kept investigating what was happening in the building's management, one thing would lead to another. The incident with the cleaning lady ended up drawing attention to him. It would only be a matter of time before everything came to light. "Alan," Thompson called, closing the office door as he entered. "Yes, sir." Alan looked up from the computer, trying to appear calm, but there was sweat on his forehead. He was also feeling the pressure. "We need to destroy the old records. All invoices from the last 2 years. Anything that might raise suspicion." Alan hesitated. "Won't that attract even more attention?" "Don't worry about that. I'll deal with the consequences. Just do as I say." Alan nodded, but he couldn't hide his discomfort. Thompson looked at him coldly. "Remember, Alan, we're in this together. If I go down, you go down with me." While Thompson put his plan into action, Diane, an administrative employee who worked with financial records, noticed something strange. Diane was known for her loyalty and discretion, but also for her meticulousness. While reviewing the files, she found glaring inconsistencies, suppliers that didn't exist and payments that didn't match the building's actual inventory. Diane felt her blood run cold. For years, she had trusted Thompson, believing he was just strict and demanding. But this was something much bigger. She knew that if she were caught investigating, she could lose her job, or worse. Diane didn't know who to turn to, but then she remembered Liz. Liz was brave and had challenged Thompson before, even if silently. Diane decided to find her at the end of the day. "Liz," Diane called, finding her in the locker room. "Diane, is everything okay?" Liz asked, noticing the anxious look on her colleague's face. "I need to talk to you. In private." Liz agreed, and the two sat down at a nearby cafe. Diane took a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "These are financial records from the building," Diane began, looking around as if expecting to be followed. "I found inconsistencies. Thompson is involved in something big, and I think he plans to blame other employees if it's discovered." Liz's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. He's deleting records, but I managed to save some before they were erased. This is going to blow up soon, and I want you to know before he starts pointing fingers." Liz took a deep breath, processing the information. "Diane, this is serious. Someone needs to know." "Who?" "Thompson controls everything." Liz hesitated. She knew William was investigating the building, but revealing that could put Diane and herself in danger. After a moment of silence, she decided, "I know someone who can help, but you need to trust me." The next morning, Liz contacted William through his assistant. To her surprise, she was called in for a private meeting that same day. William received her in his office with a calm and firm look. "Liz, I hear you have something important to share." Liz sat down, her hands sweaty. "Yes, Mr. Grant. Diane found evidence of corruption in the financial records. Thompson is involved and might try to blame other employees to get out of it." William nodded slowly, as if he had already expected this. "Do you trust Diane?" "I do. She's always been loyal, but I think she's as worried as I am." William was silent for a moment before responding. "Thank you for bringing this to me. I promise that no innocent employee will be harmed. Continue doing your work as usual and leave the rest to me." Liz felt a momentary sense of relief, but she was still nervous. William was hard to read, and she didn't know how far he would go to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, far from all the chaos at Parker Heights, Martha received an unexpected visit. It was a cold afternoon, and she was at her small apartment in the Bronx, taking care of her mother. When she opened the door, she found Charlie standing there, holding an envelope in one hand. "Charlie?" she asked, surprised. "Hi, Martha," he said, with a shy smile. He looked different, cleaner, more confident. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Charlie entered and looked around. The apartment was simple but cozy. He sat on the small sofa while Martha brought 2 cups of tea. "I needed to see you," he began, holding the envelope tightly. "I wanted to thank you for what you did that day. Liz gave me your address." "Charlie, there's no need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," he replied, shaking his head. "Not everyone would. You saved my life, you know? That blanket kept me alive on the worst night I've ever faced. But it wasn't just that. It was what you did, without expecting anything in return. That gave me hope that there was still kindness in the world." Martha was moved, but also intrigued. "What happened to you, Charlie? How did you end up like that?" Charlie hesitated, but finally answered. "I made mistakes. Not criminal things, but bad choices. I worked for companies where corruption was common, and when everything collapsed, I was blamed for something I didn't do. My reputation was destroyed, and I lost everything. Since then, I've lived on the streets. I never managed to get back on my feet because I didn't have the courage to ask for help, and my name was already defamed in the corporate world." Martha listened intently, feeling a mix of compassion and curiosity. Charlie opened the envelope. It was some money he had managed to earn from odd jobs on the street since that day she gave him the blanket. "I know you lost your job, and I want to help you a little. I won't need this money at the shelter where I'm staying, and besides, I'm doing small jobs on the street, sweeping yards, picking up trash, so I earn some cash." Martha was moved and said, "Thank you so much, but I can't accept it. I want you to keep it for an emergency. The emergency is this: to help you. Tomorrow I'll earn a little more, and besides, I always have food at the shelter," Charlie said. Martha accepted with tears in her eyes. "One more thing, Martha. I have an invitation for you," Charlie said mysteriously. "An invitation? From who?" Martha asked. Charlie hesitated for a moment before replying, "William Grant." The news of a general meeting came as a bombshell at Parker Heights. It was rare for William Grant, the mysterious and discreet owner, to get directly involved in the building's operations. No details were revealed, but everyone knew something important was about to happen. Thompson was panicking. He had noticed William investigating records and holding meetings with specific employees. He felt the control he had held for so long slipping through his fingers. On the day of the meeting, Thompson couldn't contain himself any longer. Before it began, he went to William's office, pushing the door open without waiting for permission. "William, with all due respect, what is happening here?" he asked, trying to keep a respectful tone, but his voice tinged with anxiety. William was sitting calmly at his desk, looking over a document. He looked up, unhurried. "Thompson, did you forget how to knock?" Thompson ignored the provocation. "I have a right to know why this meeting was called. If there's anything to discuss, you should have come to me first." William closed the document and placed it on the desk, interlacing his fingers. "You'll find out everything at the meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to." The manager froze for a moment, but realized it was pointless to insist. He left the office with clenched fists, anger and fear boiling inside him. The meeting room was packed when William arrived. He was accompanied by his assistant and had a laptop under his arm. The murmurs among the employees ceased the moment he entered, the weight of his presence silencing the room. Thompson was sitting in the back, tense, his eyes fixed on William. "Good morning," William began, positioning himself at the front of the room. "I invited everyone here today because I believe it's time we talked about what really matters." The employees exchanged confused glances, but William continued. "This building is not just a physical space. It is sustained by people. People who clean the halls, who greet visitors, who make sure everything runs smoothly." He paused, looking into each corner of the room. "But recently, something happened in this building that made me question whether we are truly fulfilling the purpose we want to achieve." He connected the laptop to the projector, and the screen at the front of the room lit up. The video of Martha helping Charlie began to play. The silence in the room was absolute. In the video, Martha wrapped the blanket around Charlie, the cold wind visible in the recording. Her generosity sharply contrasted with the sterile and rigid environment of the building. When the video ended, William resumed speaking. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is the kind of behavior that should define who we are. Empathy, kindness, humanity. And what happened to this employee after she did this? She was fired." The faces of the employees ranged from shame to indignation. Thompson, at the back of the room, began shifting in his seat, but William continued. "Martha Kane lost her job because she helped someone. But that's not the only thing wrong here. Over the past few months, I've investigated this building and discovered something even more concerning." He switched to another screen, showing financial reports. Walter Thompson and Alan Myers have been involved in a corruption scheme. They bought overpriced materials, falsified documents, and embezzled money that should have been used to improve your working conditions. Murmurs began to spread throughout the room. Thompson stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "I've always done my best to protect the interests of this building." William slowly turned to him. "Protect the building's interests? Or your own, Thompson? I did what was necessary to keep the building running. These reports can be manipulated. You know how hard it is to keep everything under control." William didn't blink. "Hard, yes, but theft and exploitation are not justifiable. And now you're out. Consider this your last day as manager." Thompson opened his mouth to protest, but realized it was pointless. He left the room, slamming the door, but not before casting a look of hatred at William. When the tension eased, William turned his attention back to the audience. Now that this is settled, I want to introduce someone who was directly impacted by this act of compassion. He gestured, and Charlie, who had been sitting discreetly in the corner, stood up and walked to the front of the room. The employees looked at him curiously, many recognizing him from the video. Charlie held the microphone with trembling hands, but his voice came out clear. "I am the man Martha helped that day. But I'm not just a homeless man. I was an executive. I had everything, a career, a home, a family, and I lost it all because of bad choices and the greed of others." The room fell silent as he continued. "I made mistakes, but they weren't crimes. I was used as a scapegoat and thrown out of the corporate world. My pride kept me from asking for help, and before I knew it, I was on the streets." He looked at Martha, who had also been invited and was sitting among the employees. "When she helped me, it wasn't just a blanket. It was hope. And I decided to do something with that hope." Charlie's words left many employees emotional, some with tears in their eyes. Martha, her face flushed, couldn't believe the impact her gesture had caused. The meeting at Parker Heights brought significant changes. Thompson was gone, Charlie had become a symbol of transformation, and Martha, rehired, finally felt that her act of compassion had been valued. William, in turn, began implementing a new social program that he shared with the employees throughout the week in smaller meetings, with Martha as one of the leaders. But the calm didn't last long. Just a week after the fateful meeting, an explosive article appeared in one of the city's largest newspapers. Under the headline, "The Dark Past of the New Face of Kindness," the story exposed Charlie's history, detailing accusations of financial fraud at one of William's buildings years ago. The article made it seem like Charlie was not only guilty, but also that William knew everything at the time and chose to protect him. The video of Martha helping Charlie had already gone viral in the media, and now this article only added fuel to the controversy. The news was met with shock by the Parker Heights staff and those who had begun to admire the social program. In the building, the mood became gloomy again. Whispers started circulating. Liz, who had defended Charlie and Martha, felt the weight of judgment around her. "I knew he had a complicated past," she whispered to Diane, "but I didn't know it was this serious." Martha found out about the news while shopping. Her mother was at home, resting, and she was taking a moment of peace to organize the day. When she got a call from Liz, her expression changed immediately. "Did you see the news, Martha?" Liz asked urgently. "No." "What happened?" "Charlie. His past. It's in all the papers. They're saying William knew about the fraud charges and that he covered it all up." Martha was paralyzed for a moment. "Is that true?" "I don't know. But I think you need to talk to William." That afternoon, Martha walked into William's office without warning. He was sitting at his desk, talking on the phone, but ended the call when he saw her enter. "Martha," he said, surprised. "What's wrong?" "I want the truth," she said firmly, holding up the newspaper with the article about Charlie. Did you know that Charlie was accused of fraud at one of your buildings? I need to know who I'm dealing with, since I'm supposed to be the director of social projects for the company that owns and manages this building." William sighed, his expression darkening. He motioned for her to sit, but Martha remained standing. "I knew," he admitted after a long silence. "But it's not as simple as it seems." "Then explain it to me," Martha insisted, crossing her arms. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Charlie was a promising executive. He worked for a third-party company that managed one of my buildings. When a financial scandal broke out, he was the first to be accused. There was no solid evidence, but he was thrown to the wolves because someone had to pay. Martha watched him closely. "And you didn't do anything to defend him?" "I couldn't," William replied, turning to face her. "At that time, I was building my reputation. Any association with that scandal could have destroyed everything. I chose to protect my business instead of helping someone I knew was innocent." The disappointment in Martha's eyes was evident. "You could have done something, anything, and instead, you let him sink." William didn't respond immediately. "I know, and it's one of the things I regret most. Maybe that's why his gesture now has such an impact on me. He didn't let what happened define who he is. And neither can I." Martha was silent, torn between admiring William's honesty and feeling betrayed by his past actions. Meanwhile, Charlie was reading the article in a cheap cafe, far from the building. Every word felt like a blade, cutting into his newfound dignity. He knew that exposing his past was hurting William, Martha, and the social program that could help so many people. He took an old notebook he carried with him and began to write a letter. The words flowed with difficulty, but he knew he needed to say something before disappearing again. "Martha, and to whom it may concern, I know my past is complicating everything, but know that I am innocent and always have been. They made me a scapegoat. They never found any proof, and yet my name was dragged through the mud. In any case, the last thing I wanted was to harm you or anyone else who believed in me. But maybe it's time for me to disappear for good. Don't let my story overshadow the impact of your gesture. You changed my life, and you can change many others. With gratitude, Charlie." Charlie left the letter at the Parker Heights front desk, addressed to Martha, and disappeared. The news continued to gain traction, and William faced growing pressure. The questions wouldn't stop. Why did he hide Charlie's past? Why did he bring a man with a questionable history into such an important project? Instead of shying away, William decided to face the situation head-on. He scheduled a press conference, where he promised to clarify everything. "William," his assistant said, trying to make him reconsider, "this could be a disaster. If I don't take responsibility now, all the work we've done will be for nothing," he replied, determined. The day of the press conference arrived with a mix of tension and curiosity. Reporters from various media outlets filled the hall reserved for the event. The spotlight lights shone brightly, cameras were in position, and an uneasy buzz hung in the air as everyone waited for William Grant. He entered with firm steps, impeccably dressed but with a serious expression. He climbed the stage and positioned himself in front of the microphone. For a moment, he looked at the audience before beginning. "Good morning. Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice firm. "I invited you all here because I believe transparency is essential, especially when dealing with initiatives that impact lives." Silence settled over the room. He paused before continuing. "In recent days, news has emerged about Charlie Bennett, one of the participants in our social program. The reports have brought up past events, in which Charlie was accused of fraud while working for a subcontractor at one of my buildings. I want to make it clear that Charlie was unjustly accused. He was made a scapegoat in a scandal that destroyed many careers, including his. As you may know, he was tried and acquitted, but since the real culprits were never found, his name continued to appear in rumors and tabloid newspapers at the time. And honestly, I don't know why they're bringing up this story again now. It's unfortunate." Murmurs started in the audience, but William raised his hand to silence them. "Although I knew of his innocence, I chose not to intervene at the time. I chose to protect my business rather than protect a person. That is a decision that, to this day, I carry as one of the greatest regrets of my life." The room fell into absolute silence. William's vulnerability was something no one had expected. "But I am here today to take responsibility for not having had the courage to help defend him at the time," he continued. Charlie's story reminded me of the power of empathy and the importance of making amends, even when they seem irreparable. That is why I am committed to transforming my business into something that goes beyond profit. The Parker Heights social program will be expanded to other locations, with a long-term commitment, and it will be led by someone who understands better than anyone the impact of an act of kindness. William gestured, and Martha stepped onto the stage, surprised by the applause that erupted from the audience. She was visibly moved, but held her composure beside William. "This is Martha Kane," William said. "As you already know, she was unjustly fired for an act of compassion. Today, she is the leader of the program that will help hundreds of people in vulnerable situations." Martha took the microphone, took a deep breath, and spoke with a voice filled with emotion. "I never imagined that something as simple as offering a blanket could have such an impact. The truth is that we all have the power to change lives, and it starts with small acts. I am honored to lead this program, but it is a responsibility I share with all of you." The conference ended with applause, and journalists began asking questions about the next steps for the program, William's future, and Charlie's situation. Weeks later, an event was organized at Parker Heights to celebrate the official launch of the social program. The hall was decorated simply, but had a welcoming atmosphere. Employees, local residents, and beneficiaries of the program were in attendance. Martha moved around the hall, greeting people and making sure everything was in order. However, something made her stop. Across the room, leaning against the wall, was Charlie. He was well-dressed but discreet, trying to avoid drawing attention. Martha crossed the room with determined steps. When she reached him, Charlie tried to back away. "You don't have to do this, Martha. I just wanted to see how things were going." "You're not running away again," she said with a warm smile. Before he could respond, she hugged him. Charlie stood still for a moment, but then he returned the hug. I don't know how to thank you," he murmured, his voice choked. "You've done enough, Charlie," Martha replied. "You took action. You helped change all of this. You sent the video to William, and that made all the difference. It's more than I could have asked for." They pulled apart, and Martha held his hands. "Are you going to be okay now?" "I'm trying," he replied. "I'm in a shelter, taking part in rehab programs. It's hard, but I'm taking small steps." Martha nodded, smiling. "Small steps are all we need to start. And don't forget, you'll be greatly helped by the program." "I already heard there's significant help waiting for you. William confided in me. It's a personal donation from him." Martha smiled, relieved. As the guests continued to celebrate, William watched the scene from a distance. He smiled slightly, as if, for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. The story ended not with a perfect resolution, but with people finding redemption and purpose amid their mistakes and struggles. "Simple acts can transform the world," Martha said in her closing speech, her voice full of emotion. "And sometimes, even mistakes guide us to redemption." The audience gave a standing ovation, while Martha looked at Charlie and William, aware that this moment was just the beginning of something much greater.